How's it going, friends, and welcome to this video. So it's a little bit different this week because I'm having a few technical issues and I'm a little bit behind on recording. So yeah, we're going to jump straight into this video, so I hope you have your brew and a bicky to hand. So in this video we are going to be looking at RT-Diorama and their European corner base. Now this is going to be the finisher for the Easy8 build I've been doing for from Ryfield Models. If you haven't seen the previous two videos of the tank build, there will be should hopefully be a link in the top corner. If not, there will be at the end of the video. There'll be the links to those videos. Now this base is made from, as I believe, gypsum. It's cast and it's really nicely done. So since we're going to have a look at some of the parts quickly, we have obviously the roof, some nice roof tiles there. We've also got some laser cut doors and windows. They also include these signs which you can use. I'm not going to use these because these are, obviously you can see, German, and I was trying to kind of put this in the sort of area of potentially France or something along the lines of that. Now as you can see, it's quite nicely packaged. It's not a nice bubble wrap and everything's all separate. There has been a little bit of damage, that little bit at the bottom of the window frame, windowsill, sorry. I will actually have to rebuild that because I couldn't seem to find the part for that. Obviously we've got some steps, the chimney stack. One of the sides, again nicely done. They've had some, brick damage or, wear of the brick over time. So that's a nice little add there. I'm hoping to do something like this myself from scratch, but I'm still trying to figure it out. Main part of the chimney there as well. And we've also got obviously the base, which is a nice, this is corner piece. We've got the road there with some nice dips and divots in there, and the place for where the building is going to sit. Even though it is nicely moulded, there are a few air pockets in there which I will use some plaster just to fill those in. So I'll spread that across the entirety of that base and some of the brickwork and tiles, just to fill those in. But it's nothing major, but it's the sort of things that you get from these castings anyway. To glue these together, if you score some lines into the parts that you need to glue, and just use some PVA glue, and it will bond really well. I have, just in case, super glued in a couple of wire pegs in there just to give it a little bit of extra strength. I don't think it actually really needs it, but I've just put those in as a just in case. But like I said, just a bit of PVA glue to glue to glue the parts together. And again, scoring it as well helps because it gives it something to bond a lot better with, and it dries pretty solid quite quickly. Now for the door in particular, was missing a door handle, so quite simply made a door handle using some plastic styrene for like the key plate and a little rod for like the knob to sit on, and the knob itself is just made from some green stuff. I was also being a little bit lazy as well. I decided to hand brush on some black primer, but also at the same time I thought actually this would help a little bit, giving some texture to the door as it was being hand brushed, and obviously all the layers on after that were hand painted as well. And I did it as rough as possible just to give it some sort of wood grainy type texture. The doorknob I actually mixed in with some really silvery metallic Vallejo paint and a bit of gold to kind of give that brass look, and a little bit of a dark brown wash over the top to give it a little bit more of an aged effect. And then for chipping, as you can see, I did all this by hand, using a slightly lightened colour of the base coat, which I used, I think, French blue from MIG, and I just added a little bit of white into that, just to, just lighten up those sort of chips and scratches. They were easily cut out using a hobby blade. They're only connected by a couple of points, so it makes it really easy to remove these from their main sprue. And just a little minor bit of cleanup with a hobby blade, just clean those up and make them nice and straight so they'll fit into their spaces. I used some clear acetate for windows, obviously. Used some PVA glue to glue these to the window frames. Now I wanted to add a little bit more to these windows, so I kind of went for this kind of like a LED sort of framed effect. I've probably done this the other way around. Put this down first and then the window afterwards, but to be honest with you, I think it looks quite good either way. For this, I just used some, actually it was mosquito netting for a window, and painted sort of a blacky grey colour. Now we move on to the cobblestones, and I pretty much did this the exact same with the building, and just using different variations of grey, some bits with a little bit of more of a blue sort of colour, so kind of like a slaty grey colour, and just randomly painted them in to try and give as much differentiation and variation throughout the cobblestones. And again, I would have done exactly the same on the house. With the pavement, initially I went in with one colour and actually just felt this was just too uniform, so I went over a few of the other slabs with a slightly different variation of grey. Now it is looking quite bright, but we will tone this all down with some washes. I used black wash from Vallejo from this, just slapped it on. As you can see with a paper towel, I sort of dabbed it just to kind of give some variation and some kind of like dirty texture to it. The pavement, I went in with some powder pigments. I used Stardust for this, and this was dark earth, and just basically dumped a load onto the base, and then just brushed it around with a old brush, mainly pushing as much into obviously the recesses as possible. I'm not overly worried about it sitting on top of the stones, because it gives a little bit more, gives it more of a dirty look. But when I put some pigment fixer on later on, it does wash it away a little bit over the tops of the stones, but keeps it within the cracks. In some areas it did wash it away. All you need to do is just quite simply just go back over the area again and just repeating it until it all sits in. Now I did spray it actually initially with water. I do apologise, I just remembered watching this back now. Initially I did water and went over it, and then afterwards, when it was dry like this, I used the pigment fixer afterwards, and I did exactly the same across the building. Again, like the slabs and everything, it's still quite light. I purposely went in initially with really light colours because I knew it was going to be quite bright, and with the washes later on it will tone it down a little bit more. Around the roof, the windows and the lower half of the building, I used a grime. Again, this was from Vallejo. It's pretty much an acrylic paint, this one is. I actually used a mix of that and some streaky grime from AK. It's just sort of trying to get a little bit of variation in there. Again, in the lower half I pretty much just slapped it on and then just sort of dabbed it out, and then going in with some sort of up and down sort of streaky motion, just to give that impression that the grime or the algae basically in this case was, after it's sat on that sort of ledge part, it's slowly crept down the side of the building. Once that was all done, it was time to put the windows into place. These actually fitted really snugly, so I didn't actually even bother gluing these into place. But there were a few gaps around the windows, so what I needed to do there was just put some putty around there just to block in the gaps. While that was left to dry, I made a little window box for the front window. I used some styrene card for this, which already had a wood grain texture over the front, and I did this the way most things really, to be fair, with quite a bit of dry brushing. Obviously, I based it with quite a dark brown. I think I used wood brown for that, and then used a light grey brown. Again, dry brushed across the surface to bring out the texture in the plasticard. I then came in with some brown panel liner from Tamiya, just to bring out all the deep recesses in the wood grain, and try and make it look a little bit more aged. I put a bit of XPS foam inside to bulk it out, and then used some textured earth just in case any of this was seen afterwards. I used some AK shrubbery, I think that's what it's called. Well, they don't really give it a proper name for it, and these are just like little bits of clumped pre-done like bushes. You can use them for pretty much anything, or like in the case this like little window box, or even just some random small plants, and this was glued into place. I just used PVA glue for this. So there was a bit of a gap between the building and the base, so I masked the entire areas off and used some Tamiya putty to fill in the gap, and all I did was just smeared it right into the corner and tried to make it as clean as possible. So once I remove the masking tape, I didn't actually have to do any more work to it other than blend the base and the building together. Unfortunately, because I've forgotten what colours I used for the concrete step and bottom half of the building, I ended up having to repaint the entire thing all over again, and doing the same weathering steps as I did before. To try and add a little bit more environment to the lower part of this base, I mixed this sort of snot green sort of colour to sort of imitate moss or algae growing around the lower part of the building, and between the gaps of the slabs and on some of the road itself. Unfortunately, I had a wee bit of an accident with the building. When manoeuvring my camera arm around the model, I actually caught it, and the whole thing top pulled down, and obviously it broke a large chunk out. So what I did was I used some Tamiya putty for the most part to cover most of the cracks. But some of the tiles, or the ridge of the tile, was quite badly banged up, and I couldn't really use the putty to try and mount it back up properly. So I used some green stuff to remold those tile ridges, and then all I had to do then was blend everything all back in afterwards. Once I'd finished faffing around with that, I decided to add some moss to the roof. Now this is really easily done. Just put a few dollops of PVA glue, and I actually used neat PVA glue for this. Dabbed them in sort of the areas that you'd think would get moss growing in, so some of the crevices and ridges, but even just on some of the main parts of the tile, if you just look at real world references, you'll see that moss will just grow absolutely anywhere. And for this, all I used was some Woodland Scenics fine turf for this, I think this one was, I think it's burnt turf I use for this. It's the one I tend to, to keep in stock the most. And just quite literally sprinkle it all over. Knock off the excess, and if you feel like you need or want to add more to it, just repeat the process. Once I was happy with that and it was all dry, I used that same sort of snot green paint and painted all the moss and tried to make it a little bit more realistic looking. To try and make it a little bit more realistic, I went over all this with some Tamiya panel liner. This was trying to represent, you know, sort of the dry and dead parts of the moss. Now, once this had dried out and I was completely happy with it, I gave it a very light dry brushing with a sort of greeny yellow colour to again give you that sort of more realistic look of moss. Now, moving back to the windows. Now, at this point I decided that I wanted to add a little bit more to them, and I thought, well, why not use some curtains? It's pretty a normal thing that you see in a window. So originally I was going to use this glass cleaning wipe. In previous times, normally for like tarpaulins, I've used either something like this or baby wipes. And I thought this was going to be quite good for it, but I just couldn't get it to work and sit right. So I went, in the end, for tracing paper. And all I did was, with that, is just did a concertina fold. And once I'd folded it up, I just sort of squidged it from either side, just to try and take away the sharp edges and kind of give that sort of, you know, folded concertina type of curtain look. And then all I needed to do was put it on a curtain rail. So what I did was, with a pin, poked a hole through all the crinkles, and all I did was got some copper wire and threaded that through, and that was my curtain rail. I then painted them, and all that I need to do then was bend the ends round so they'd come away from the wall a little bit, so you're giving enough room for the curtains to sit properly, and just drilled a couple of small holes in, super glued into place, and that was my curtains done. I also had the idea of having a kind of tree or vine up the front of the building, and I used for this some natural roots that I picked out on a walk once. When you're using stuff like this, you want to, you know, especially if you pick out the garden, you want to let it dry out before you start using it, just in case there's anything, you know, still living on there that you don't want to be part of the diorama. So what I did was I stuck two pieces together, super glued them into place, and I did the same for the smaller branches. As you can see, I cut most of the small roots off this main root, and I used seafoam to you know, make the branches up. Now what I've done is I put super glue onto the seafoam itself, and then, as you saw me dab a little bit of super glue accelerate on there, which makes this process a lot quicker. Then all that was left to do was paint it. I primed it, obviously in black, as I always do, because I always find this is the always the best coat for me. And then from the top I sprayed it with Deck Tan, again spraying from the above to sort of give it some slight natural shading. And then I hand painted from AK Interactive using their wood range. I then painted it in a light grey brown, which is more of a tan colour really than any form of grey. And while it was still wet, I went in with a medium brown to wet blend it. I only really concentrated on the main twigs that we're going to be seeing. Of course, we're going to be putting some flocking over the top, and you know, we should hopefully not see any of the bits of mist underneath. Once it was dry, I again went in with Tamiya accent panel liner, again using the dark brown to pick out all the wood grain, which with this I used obviously the natural texture of the root for this, so I didn't really do anything with this. This was probably the most natural thing I've done. I then covered all the sea foam in with some pure PVA glue, and then again went in with some Woodland Scenics fine turf. I then, once that had dried, gave it a bit of a spraying with some watered down PVA, and then sprinkled it all over again to fill in any of the gaps. Then I went in and cut a small chunk of the paving out, and this is where the tree is going to sit. All then I needed to do was put a pin in the bottom of the tree and super glue it into place. Now you can see I've also added some flowers in there as well. I just used some ground crayon for this, which I used old trees grater for, and again sprayed it with some watered down PVA and then sprinkled those over the top. Now as you can see, there's a bit of a gap between the tree because the way I've glued it into position, unfortunately. So again, bit of super glue and some super glue speeder upper stuff, and that stuck it to the wall, nice and simple. And just to finish it off, I used AK's diorama terrains using muddy ground for this. I used it as it was. I did mix it with some water because it's an acrylic type paste, just to get it to spread around a little bit better. Now, as a last minute thing I needed to do, well, I felt like I needed to do, was add some more plant pots. So I used some Das clay, and as you can see, I used an old paintbrush just to roll it out and thin it out a little bit, and also use that same brush to wrap it round to make a small terracotta plant pot. I gave them a quick rough painting using some actual rust colours for this because I didn't have anything that was actually terracotta, and weathering them up with some streaky grime, and then I used some pre-done static grass with some little flowers, and I just stuck those into the pot and they were good. So the last thing now to do was place the tank onto the diorama and take some snazzy photos. So here we go, my friends, here's the finished scene. I hope you have enjoyed this video. I hope you have enjoyed the series. If you haven't seen the first two videos yet, there'll be links on the end card at the end of this video. Now, if you are new around here and you have enjoyed the video and you haven't done so already, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. If you'd also like to support the channel further, there are links in the description down below. Now, I'm going to leave you with the finished photos of this build. Again, I do hope you have enjoyed this, and as always, I'll catch you again soon.